welcome back to another episode of Masked Monologues. Today, I am excited to have Mike Brennan here with me. He is a digital artist. Do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, how long you've been doing this for, and what inspired you to start?
Sure. Yeah. Really, I call myself kind of a creator and communicator, telling stories on pages and stages because there are several components to what I do, but visual art, graphic design, and illustration specifically being my background. As far as where it started and how long I've been doing it, I think like a lot of artists, I was the typical kid who was drawing and couldn't get enough of all the art supplies, right?
Mhm.
And so I remember when I was a kid having this very vivid experience where I would create greeting cards for family members and I would give it to them and I would see their faces light up. And they would say, "You did this for me." And then they'd hang it on the fridge or they'd cherish it in that moment. And as an 8-year-old kid or something, you don't know it at that time. But looking back, I realized like, oh, there's something happening here. There's an
Mhm.
exchange that I want to do more of. I get to create something, give it to somebody else, and they get something out of return. Maybe that's a smile, maybe it's something else. But I knew that I wanted to do more of that with my life, to
Mhm.
make people feel good through the things I create. And fast forward a little bit, did all the typical art things for high school, leaned into that, was time to make a decision for college and career. And the path was, hey, I want to go to art school. And my parents were, are you sure? Don't you want to be
Mhm.
a doctor or a lawyer, something that makes money? Something
It's
like that.
always that.
Yes, the typical conversations, which I get because there's
Mhm.
concern. And of course, there's the narrative and culture that says it's the starving artists. You're going to be on
Mhm.
a street corner someplace trying to hawk your wares and sell your art, that kind of thing. So, but I was pretty stubborn. And so I ended up going to art school in New York City, close to where I live. And, it was the best experience. And from there, I went into graphic design because for me, that was a compromise with my parents because they're like, at
Mhm.
least that's commercially viable. You can work at an organization or in corporate doing some of that. And so I went into graphic design, and that was really the career path for a long time. And eventually hit a wall and got burned out. And
Mhm.
that's another part of my story. But to close the loop on the question that you asked, I've been doing it since I was a kid. And really, it's that initial experience that continues to drive me to create today in all the things that I do.
Yes. And I want to expand a little bit about you choosing to go to art school instead of pursuing a traditional career path. I'm not sure if that's what you'd refer to it as, but instead of being like a doctor, a lawyer, the higher earners, can you tell me how art school varied from that? What exactly did you learn in art school? And I'm wondering, for a lot of artists, I've noticed that an entrepreneurial mindset is
Mhm.
conducive to actually making money from the work that they create. Did you learn any of that in art school, or just walk me through your process there?
Sure. Yeah. I think I get this question a lot of, is art school, quote, worth it, right?
Mhm.
Should I go to
Yeah.
art school? And I say it depends. It depends on a bunch of factors. One being, like, are you looking just to learn particular skill sets and knowledge? Because if that's the case, and that's the only thing that you're looking for, you can get a lot of that these days online and through
Mhm.
other non-traditional type of education. And so there's no reason to go into debt or to put a lot of stress on yourself for
Mhm.
the expense of art school. But the thing that I always underscore was really the environment, being
Mhm.
close to other students who are really talented. And
Mhm.
you realize very quickly, oh, I'm in some deep waters here. Like, I really
Mhm.
need to make sure I bring my best. And
Yes.
so, because there's that sense of everyone bringing their best, it helps you rise to the challenges. And then beyond even the fellow students, at least for the School of Visual Arts and Fashion Institute of Technology, where I went,
Mm.
those two schools, their staff were working professionals. And so you had people who are in the field
Mhm.
doing what you're learning in real time. It's not, hey, 20 years ago, I
Mhm.
used to do this and now I just teach and that's all I do. And so having access to people in the field who had connections, who had real time projects that they were working on and
Mhm.
clients. And so getting that knowledge from someone who's actually doing this and is just years ahead of you was really valuable. And so I think that is something that having that kind of connection, that community piece is something that you don't get if you're simply sitting at home accessing online education, and you don't have some place to go to have that sense of peer-to-peer community, and then also mentorship, if you will, from
Mhm.
people who are doing it, who are ahead of
Yes. And earlier in this episode, you said that you helped artists hone their creative, sort of embrace their creative process. Can you expand on that and just elaborate on what you do or what exactly how you help artists?
Sure. Yeah, I started to say I got to a certain point where I reached burnout for design, and that actually led me on a path of not doing anything creative for about 10 years. I hung it up because there were several circumstances in my life that were conspiring to say, this isn't working. And so I just really threw the whole thing out. And what I didn't realize was that when you don't show up as a creator and that's who you are, it really messes with you, especially on a mental health level. And so 10 years in, I'm suffering from depression and there's a bunch of other life circumstances that happened. And I'm like, I don't know what to do here, but
Mhm.
I'm feeling like this call to come back to my art, but not from necessarily like a, hey, I need to go and enter the workforce again
Mhm.
and be in design, but more so from, hey, remember that kid who had joy because he was creating? Can we
Mhm.
get back to that place? Forget the clients, forget the committees and the budgets and all the
Mhm.
things that it's become over the years. Can we get back to that essence of you made some stuff, it made you feel good, and it made the people around you feel good? Can we get back to that? And in the midst of this I was like, I don't even know if I can do that. So I started just asking myself a lot of questions and listening to that prompting, that inner voice. And I decided, what do I have to lose at this point? I'm already at rock bottom. And so I started what was someone turned me onto this idea of a 365-day art making journey
Mhm.
where you basically show up every day and you create something.
Mhm.
And at first, I'm terrified, thinking, I haven't showed up for the past 10 years. How am
Yeah.
I possibly going to show up for this next year every single
Mhm.
day? Right. And again, I was like, what do I have to lose? So I said, I'm going to set out to do this. And so I broke it down into small projects and I did a lot of bad work. I did a lot
Mhm.
of things that were embarrassing and
Yeah.
just, oh, my capacity isn't what it once was.
Mm.
But I was learning to flex those muscles again and eventually got to the end of the year and said, okay, great. I did it. Check. Now what? And
Mhm.
I felt like I needed to keep going. And so I kept going year after year. And eventually what happened is I started doing more illustration and it was showing me what my style was. It was showing me
Mhm.
what my voice was.
Mhm.
And it also started to show me a process that was at work that I realized about 4 or 5 years in. This isn't necessarily just for me and my own creative practice, but I think this is something for any creative person who's trying to create anything. There's this sense of establishing a daily creative habit and a
Mhm.
practice of showing up, of choosing yourself, of
Yes.
being intentional about your artwork and not simply just flirting with it every once in a
Mhm.
while when you feel inspired. And I was like, I need to take this process and actually get it out to people and help people who are
Mhm.
either stuck like I was, or maybe they put their creativity on a shelf
Mhm.
because maybe they had a certain season of life where they
Mhm.
couldn't do anything. Maybe they were tending to a family and
Yes.
now things have changed and they're coming back to the creativity.
Mhm.
Or they're at a starting point and they're like, I don't really know what to do, but I know I need
Mhm.
to do something. And
Mhm.
so coming alongside folks like that and saying, look, I have this process that I can help you
Mhm.
walk through and start to be using your intention, using your creativity with intention and purpose,
Yes.
and then developing that habit and that momentum.
Mhm.
So again, it doesn't really matter what the quote end product is. If
Mhm.
somebody's a musician, photographer, visual artist, or writer, whatever they're creating, it doesn't really matter. And you hinted at this before saying the entrepreneurial part too. I think there's a big part of creativity that is tied to entrepreneurship
Mhm.
because you're always creating something and testing and seeing, is this connecting with an audience? How can I make this better? You're pivoting from one thing to another thing. All those are lessons that we learn even in entrepreneurship. And
Mhm.
so I think when you're a creative person who is looking to tie your livelihood to creativity, you need to have an entrepreneurial mindset because it's a business. It's not simply a hobby, unless that's all you want it to be is a
Yes.
hobby, which is fine.
Mhm.
But a lot of those things also are tied to this showing up every day,
Mhm.
creating, figuring out how to get it up before people, and gaining momentum on that journey of
Mhm.
creativity.
Yes. So you just told me that you were burnt out after 10 years of, was it working on digital art then? Or can you expand on that? Tell me a little bit about your story, why you were burnt
Sure.
out, and how you found that creativity, that passion, that love.
Yeah. So when I got burned out, it was really because I was in design and
Mhm,
I was doing graphic design and I was bouncing around from agency to agency or different places. Eventually, you hit a ceiling where either
mhm,
you're not able to go any higher,
mhm,
or the staffing changes and all of a sudden you have a new creative department and they want their people that they used to work with somewhere else, or
mhm.
whatever the circumstances. It just is a volatile type thing where you may last a few years at some
Yes.
place and then you bounce somewhere
Mhm.
else. And
Sorry, may I
yeah,
ask, was it mainly in marketing for companies, or was it creating products? What exactly did you do?
sure. Yeah. But it was graphic design. And so in the early days, it was working for an advertising agency
Mm,
and then a packaging firm. And then I also did a lot of magazine layout,
mhm,
editorial magazine layout. And so towards the end, where I was getting burned out was really when I was at this magazine company and we had a deadline every 2 weeks and it was cranking out this work at a really high
mhm.
level and high pace. And what was happening is that I wasn't even able to really fully appreciate what I was creating. And then I
Yeah,
had to move on to the next thing.
yes.
And there was never really a break because it was always every 2 weeks, there's a new magazine. And so I also realized, and this is again looking back,
Mhm,
that for me, my creation process doesn't really feel complete unless I get to interact with the end user, if you will, right? The person
mhm,
who's experiencing the art and the thing I'm creating. And so for a lot of design, I would be creating things in this vacuum or with this creative team or this company. I would do something and it would get sent out, it would get printed or it'd go online or
mhm,
wherever it goes. And I would never get to see or experience the person interacting with the thing that I just created. And so it was this open loop for me that was
mhm.
never resolved. And I was
Yes.
like, I need that piece. I
Mhm,
need feedback. I need to know what I'm doing is actually making a difference in somebody's life. And so all those things really came together
mm,
to lead me to that place of just
mhm,
feeling burned out. And as far as coming back and falling in love with it, that was that whole me coming back to that point after depression, going,
mhm,
how do I do this again? How do I, not for, again, not to get back into a job situation
mhm,
or career necessarily, but even just personally, how do I create again? And what does that look like for me? What's important to me? I started asking myself some hard, deep questions that really wouldn't have come unless I had been in that place of struggle.
mhm,
And it was like rising through the ashes, the phoenix rising up from the ashes and going, okay, I need to do this again. What do I want this to look like? What, if I'm making the rules now, what's important to me? And that's what led me on that path of the 365-day art making journey
mhm,
that became what I call daily creative habit, which by the way continues to this day, 12 years later, every
mhm,
single day showing up and doing some creative piece of
mhm,
work. It's morphed a little bit over the years too, to include some writing, but that essence of every day create something
mhm.
still at the heart of it.
Yes. No, I love completely what you just said there. I wanted to just tune in to the feedback element because feedback is
Hmm.
crucial for any creative out there. You obviously need input from others to know that your art is going in the right direction, that it's connecting with an audience. Can you give us some tips or some pointers on how an artist should take in feedback and apply it in a manner where it can be beneficial and advantageous, help them grow, thrive, and prosper, as opposed to being just, I say, being degraded by it or
Hmm. Yeah.
feeling diminished?
Yeah, it's important, first off, I think, to be in community. And that's key because asking people randomly really doesn't work because they don't understand the larger context of who you are as the artist and creative person and maybe some of the goals that you're trying to achieve. And so to have just a one off experience of here's something I created,
Mhm,
get it before somebody and say, what do you think? There's not enough information there. And it's almost not fair to ask somebody in that situation. So that's why I go back to community and say it's
mhm,
important to be around people. Now,
yeah,
I will say this also: be clear as to what you're looking for in the feedback you're asking for.
mm,
Like, it's not enough just to have an open ended, what do you think? Because somebody may be like, I don't know if you're looking for strictly encouragement because you're feeling a little fragile right now,
Yes.
right? I don't know if you're looking for just the hard press of, okay, we're going to tear this thing apart a little bit
Mhm.
because I want to push you in this moment to get the
Mhm.
best out of you. And without context and conversation, we can leave ourselves open to feedback that goes wrong and critique
Mhm.
that goes sideways quickly. I remember when I was in art school, there were opportunities to put, we would do the work, we do the assignment, we put it
Mhm.
up on the wall, and then everybody in that class would critique each other's work and give
Yes.
feedback. And very quickly, it became apparent to me like, oh, there are some people in here who don't have my best intention
Mhm.
at heart. They simply want to step on me and make me look bad because they're
Mhm.
trying to be the best person in the class. And so to receive their feedback would have been very different than to receive the feedback of someone who was my friend in the class,
Yeah.
who really did have my best at heart and wanted to see me do the best work possible and were pointing out things I just couldn't see.
Yeah.
And so I had to evaluate that and
Mhm.
not treat all feedback the same. And
Mhm.
even sometimes from some of the professors, like I had one professor who I didn't really receive a lot of his feedback because it was a little bit off the wall. Like he would come in and he would say, I don't like black. You
Mhm.
used a lot of black in this. Do it over. And now here's next week's project too. And I'd be like, that's not helpful feedback. You don't
Mhm.
like black. First off, that's personal preference. And beyond that, you didn't really give me any next steps. You didn't
Mhm.
give me any insights into why I should use something other than black, right? So
Yes.
there's a responsibility on you as the person who's asking for
Mhm.
feedback or seeking it to make sure that you're communicating clearly and surrounding yourself with the right type of people. And then
Mhm.
last thing I'll say on this is not everyone has earned the right to give you feedback.
Mhm.
And if people are looking to give it to you, and this especially happens online, when you
Mhm.
post work online and people just feel free to just jump in the comments, and because it seemed like they're a little bit more anonymous, they can just say whatever they want. And a lot of times it can be hurtful things. And to realize, like, I'm not receiving that because that person did not earn the right to give me feedback. They
Mhm.
don't know me. They don't know my work. They don't know my history. They don't know my goals. And
Mhm.
so I don't receive that. I'm simply unsubscribing from their comments. I don't
Mhm.
receive it. So I think you really have to be careful and intentional about
Mhm.
seeking that kind of feedback that's helpful.
Yes. No, I'm just analyzing a lot of the feedback that even I've personally gotten from other creatives out there. And I'm just wondering, what would you say differentiates someone who has your best intentions, has good intentions at heart, versus somebody who just wants to degrade you, as I was saying, and put you down? Because sometimes people can give feedback very critically and it is constructive, it's structured, and it may seem harsh, it may seem stern, although you should take it still into account versus other forms of feedback, which I'd say are rather vague. Whereas you were saying your professor said the color black. That doesn't help me. It's not constructive. I don't know how to improve that. And you were saying you have to ask for feedback in a manner which will help you become a better artist, a better creative, whatever you do. How would you go about seeking that feedback?
I think successful feedback contains both encouragement, right? Pointing out positive things that
Yes.
someone sees, as well as here's where you can improve. And so I think when something has both those elements, it's fair to consider what the person is saying. There again is context of who the person is. And if this person, you're in this community with this person, and all they ever do is tear,
Mhm.
and it's not just you, but maybe other people as well. You just see this time and time again. You can pretty quickly identify there's either an insecurity at work here
Yes.
or a jealousy or something underneath the surface that is
Mhm.
making this person respond in this way that is very attacking.
Yes.
And so, again, I think when you realize that, you make the decision to say, I'm not receiving your feedback
Mhm.
because it's not helpful. You're simply just trying to step on me
Mhm.
or put me down so you can look better.
Mhm.
And that's not helpful for the project. And it's not helpful for me as a creative person.
Yes.
And the other thing, too, I'll say is there are times when you can have, people who have your best interest at heart
Mhm.
giving you feedback that is contrary to each other. And so the point of feedback is to borrow someone else's set of lenses and perspective and
Mhm.
their thoughts because we're too close to our own work.
Mm,
And it doesn't mean that you have to do everything that everyone says.
mm,
You are still the creator. You're still the one in the driver's seat, and you have to have ownership and agency over yourself and over
mm,
your work, and have a level of confidence in yourself
mm,
to be able to say, I'm taking all this feedback in, I'm considering it, and I'm sifting through it and going, this is helpful, this is not. This
mhm.
is what I'm going to apply, and this I'm going to let go. And
Yes.
at the end of the day, you're the one who has to stand by your work.
Mm,
So you need to make sure that you are in agreement and it's not violating anything for you personally or creatively
mm.
in the process.
Yes. With that being said, I want to delve into the technicalities of what you do. I'm not an expert on digital art in by any means, but I know that you are. Can you tell us some softwares you would use, how you become a digital artist for anyone out there who might be interested in this career field?
Sure. I'll tackle the portion that's more digital illustration for
Mhm.
this. For that, honestly, there's two modes. There's the kind of analog, if you will, old
Mhm.
school, right? Doing
Yes.
watercolors, pen, more
Mhm.
traditional materials. And certainly there are times when I do those things and like to keep that skill set handy. There's also something about the tactile experience of getting your hands dirty and
Yeah.
that you don't get when it's a kind of clean digital experience.
Mhm.
I think even as far as a creative practice for yourself, even if it's not in work that you're selling or doing for
Mhm.
someone else, it's important to keep that as part of what you do and how you do it.
Yes.
But by and large, what I did over time, I realized that I could work quicker and
Mhm.
I could achieve certain results that were mixing mediums, if you will, that wouldn't really
Mhm.
happen in the real world.
Mm.
I could do that very easily digitally. And so there's a program called Procreate, which I'm sure most illustrators or
Yes.
people who draw, if they're already diving into digital world.
Mm.
That's an amazing program that
Mhm.
gives you layers like Photoshop,
Yes.
and it gives you a wealth of tools, and you can get all sorts of textures, and really it's sky's the limit. And that is a huge tool that I use. There's also another tool that I use sometimes more if it's a live sketch type of thing that I'm doing where I'm at an event and I'm doing things very quickly. That is called Sketches Pro.
Mhm.
And honestly, the reason why I use that particular software is because there's a leaky fountain pen setting that I really like that I have
Mhm.
not been able to replicate in Procreate or even find somebody else has maybe made some other brushes. But really, those are the primarily the two ones that I use on my iPad Pro. And then sometimes I'll take those files and export them onto my computer and then
Mhm.
use Photoshop or something else to put some finishing touches on.
Mm.
Or if I'm incorporating it into some other design, that certainly is where that happens. But really, it's having the portability of an iPad,
Mhm.
drawing wherever, whenever. There are certainly, it's opened up opportunities and makes things a lot easier so that you're not having to set up a lot of things
Mhm.
because so many times when you're an artist, you can spend all the time that you've allocated to creating in just setting up. And then you're
Yes.
realizing, like, man, I just set up and now I have no more time to create, or I've expended all this energy trying to
Mhm.
find my supplies that I can't actually dedicate this time to the creation process. And when it's all tucked away in an iPad, I think it's really easy to be able to access those tools quickly as well and then generate things quickly. You
Yes.
can do a lot of iterations. And so I don't think it's an either or. I think it's an
Mhm.
and both. And I think
Yes.
it also depends on what type of project you're doing
Mhm.
and use the appropriate tool because at the end of the day, that's really all they are is they're
Mhm.
tools. So figure out how to use them to the best of your ability. And the more tools in your toolbox, the better you'll be.
Yes. And so this question alludes back to the entrepreneurial mindset when it comes to creating. I'm wondering when artists should begin tailoring their work for their audience and when they should stop and disengage from that, just create work for themselves and remain true to who they are as an artist versus catering to an audience. Can you tell me your insights on that and what an artist should do to still gain joy and happiness and fulfillment from the creative process, but also treating it like a business?
Yes, that's a large question. I have a lot of thoughts on that, so I'll try to
Mhm.
be as succinct as possible. But I think you have to be clear with your goals. So, like early on, my thought was, I'm in school for graphic design. I graduate. I want to get a job that uses my design skills, and that's a win. That's what my goal looks like.
Mhm.
I didn't really press into anything beyond I want to make a living from my creativity, which was to my detriment later on because I realized, oh, I can be employed someplace using creative skills, but not really feel fulfilled and
Yes.
not really feel like doing work that matters to me.
Mhm.
Yeah, sure, I'm still being creative and I'm getting paid. So, yeah, it checks those boxes. But it doesn't check another box that's deeper for me. That's I want to make things that has my fingerprints on it. I don't necessarily
Yes.
want to always do things that are for the corporation or
Mhm.
according to a very strict guideline. So I think you need to be careful in what your goals are, be really clear. And there's nothing wrong with if you have one job that is okay, the purpose of this job is for me to earn a living, right?
Mhm.
To eat, live indoors, and have some money that I need to live
Mhm.
and exist. That could be creative in the creative field, or it could be outside the creative field. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think you also need to have a place where you go and make your own things.
Mhm.
And a lot of times I call these passion projects.
Mhm.
These are the projects that when I came back to my art, I started going, I'm doing this for me because I want to do this. I don't really
Mhm.
know if somebody's going to buy this. I don't even know if I'm going to make this for sale. I don't really know what's going to happen,
Yes.
but I know there's something I want to say or explore. And I think it's not an either or, it's a both and. I think even if you're in a creative job, a day job,
Mhm.
I think it's important that you have a place where you go to play, where you go to explore
Mhm.
and make things that are just yours. Have
Yeah.
a place where no one can come in and tell you, no, don't do it that way. That's not in the
Mhm.
creative brief. Or no, the client doesn't want that.
Mhm.
You're the client in that case, and you do what you want to do. Just know that maybe that won't really resonate with somebody and won't generate money, but you're not tying that responsibility to it because it's a passion project. Maybe it happens and that'd be great,
Mhm.
but if not, cool. The
Mhm.
fact that I created this is the reward itself.
Yes.
So a lot of times I get into trouble with that with people who are like, I'm creating all day long for my job. The
Mhm.
last thing I have energy for is to come home and create for myself. And I
Mhm.
say, I totally understand that because I used to be in that position. But the problem with that thinking is that it just further perpetuates this low grade frustration and places an expectation on your day job that honestly should never really be there
Mhm.
because you can't expect your job in corporate to fulfill all your personal exploration goals and creativity. It's not the right forum for that. But if you don't give yourself a forum, you'll continue to get more and more frustrated until eventually you'll just either burn out or leave. You'll go, this is not working. And so that's why I say, find the place. You have to make the time. You have to make it a priority,
Mhm.
as difficult as it seems, because ultimately, if you don't get deep enough into who you are as a creative person and just a person and what's of interest to you, you're never going to produce the quality of work that actually says something, that actually moves somebody. You'll
Mhm.
create a lot of things, and maybe those things will be profitable in some way. But I don't think you'll ever really get to the sense of this is who I am as this artist, as this creative. This is my voice. This is my style. This is the stuff that I am passionate about. You need to dig deep for that stuff and put the work in.
Yes. You know, it has to be intrinsically rewarding for you as well. Okay, so with that, I would like to wrap up this podcast episode. If you can shout out to your website, any social media platforms where people can find you, then that would be wonderful.
Sure. Yeah. The easiest place is if you go to my main website, which is mikebrennan.me, M-E. From there, there's links out to the various different things that I do, whether it's the visual art, design or illustration, or even helping some of the other creative people. It's the community called Daily Creative Habit. I have a membership. Anybody, if you're interested in being a part of, there's information there, as well as some books and resources that I've put together. And really, the main place where I am on social media is Instagram. I'm at Mike Bone,
Mhm.
Bone, and also on Facebook as well. Just easy enough to find. But I'd love to connect and certainly send me a message if you heard this episode and something I said resonated. I'd love to connect with you.
Okay, thank you so much. And if you listeners love this episode and you want more episodes like this, then please do share it with a friend or family member, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.